We're speaking to one of the great economics writers of our time, Doug Casey, founder of Casey Research and theinternationalman.com. He is the best-selling author of several good books, including Crisis Investing, which came out in the 80s, Crisis Investing 2, and more recently, Speculator, Assassin, and he has a new book coming out, Terrorist. Catchy name, Doug. We'll talk about that. First, Doug, welcome back to the show. Always a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, David. And I'm sure you'll excuse my easy informality being dressed in a T-shirt, but that's one of the many, many consequences of the current COVID hysteria. It's that people don't wear a coat and tie the way they used to.
You're a man that needs no further introduction, and I've seen you wear suits and ties all throughout your media career, so a change of pace is always appreciated, Doug. Now, let's start by
Zuckerberg can do it, so can I.
Yeah. Would be a pleasure to talk to Zuckerberg and ask him exactly why he's wearing a T-shirt, and maybe he's as casual on the outlook of life as you. Speaking of the outlook on life, we're going to be talking about the outlook on investing and specifically what higher taxes are going to do to one's portfolio. We're going to start, and I know you have many thoughts on this topic. You've talked about this for decades. Your concerns with our current tax system. I'm just going to start by playing you a few clips of Janet Yellen's testimony to Congress last week, where she discussed potential revenue raisers, in her words. Let's take a listen.
We expect to examine changes to tax policy along with programs that will address some of the long-standing problems that have held down productivity and labor supply in the United States. Will address infrastructure, risks from climate change, education, training.
Let me ask. Okay, now Yellen was then challenged on whether or not she thinks this policy could harm Americans, because if she's paying for the stimulus with higher taxes, well, wouldn't that negate the impact of the stimulus in the first place? And take a listen to this response.
The Biden administration is not going to propose policies that hurt small businesses or Americans. The Biden administration is going to propose investments this economy has long needed to be competitive and productive.
So the Biden administration is not going to propose policies that will hurt the American people. Is she right, Doug? Do you agree with her?
Look, Janet impresses me as a very nice Jewish grandmother. But the world would be much better off if she was working in a delicatessen as opposed to the Treasury Department. Almost nothing she said made sense, and everything she said was not just wrong, it was the opposite of the truth. If the government, which is an entity with its own interests, very different, it's discrete and different from the United States itself. If the government really wanted to help the American people, as opposed to just sustain itself and its own interests, it would reduce taxes radically, towards zero if possible. I mean, their taxes are morally wrong. That's the first thing. And they're economically destructive. So she doesn't seem to understand that with the government spending trillions and trillions of dollars, which they're doing this year, that aren't coming from taxes, that money is going to come from someplace else. The main purpose of taxes today are not to fund government expenditures. The Federal Reserve does that by printing money. In other words, the government sells its debt to the Fed, and the Fed credits its account to commercial banks, and then it spends the money. The main purpose of taxes today with these people is social engineering as opposed to actual revenue generation. So, look, we could parse every word she said, and it's a sign of her either being a knave or a fool. But the fact that people actually listen to her, well, I guess they have to. They might get some idea of what kind of devastation she's planning on visiting upon America.
Yeah.
Or I should say the United States. America's pretty well dead.
Okay, well, we're gonna come back to what you mean by that statement. America is pretty much dead. Now, we talked offline about one of your interviews with Phil Donahue way back in the 80s, and an audience member asked you a very quick question. I'd like to revisit this question with you several decades later, if you don't mind, and I'm paraphrasing here, of course, but he asked you basically, look, why do we, citizens of the country, why do we have to pay taxes? Can't the government just create money and pay for their own expenses?
Yeah, that was a very funny instance in the question and answer period with Phil, which incidentally has been cut. That particular segment has been cut out of the version that's on the net now. But it's strange. Somebody actually stands up and says, why do we have to pay for all this stuff? Why can't the government pay for it? He's referring to his taxes.
Right.
And the audience clapped. That was the incredible thing. It wasn't the
Fair
stupid
question.
It was the fact that the mob thought it was brilliant, that he was making a cosmic breakthrough, and clapped. And the fact is that the level of economic understanding among the population has fallen since those days. So it's further hope. It's further proof that there really is no hope at this point.
Well, what is the audience member not getting? Why can't, I mean, in theory, it's a good concept, right? Why can't, if the government is printing trillions of dollars today to finance their needs, why do we have to pay any additional taxes out of our own pocket? They can just finance themselves, borrow money if they need to.
Actually, yes, it's correct. That's what modern monetary theory is all about. It's that taxes are really just for social engineering, and printing money is what the government should do to finance what it's all about. And all those dollars will stimulate the economy and enable people to live above their means and so forth. So yeah, it worked for Zimbabwe, it worked for Venezuela, worked for Germany and the Weimar days. It'll work pretty much the same way for the U.S.
Yeah, people have compared our situation to the Weimar Republic and Venezuela and Zimbabwe, those countries you mentioned, in regards to the coming hyperinflation. But then I've heard counter arguments that no, the US dollar is too deeply embedded in the global currency regime. It's a reserve currency. That could never happen to the de facto reserve currency of the world. Which camp are you in?
Well, it just means that the collapse is going to take a little bit longer than it would otherwise. But at some point, since we have about 30 trillion US dollars outside the US at this stage, foreigners who don't have to hold dollars, Americans do, because it's legal tender within the US. It's not legal tender outside of the US. They're going to start dumping their dollars and trading those dollars for real goods in the US. Stock certificates, real estate, businesses, and that might be what actually sets off an actual runaway inflation in the US, as well as the impoverishment of the American people.
Okay, you let's go back to that. You said America is dead, and now you're saying that the American people are going to be impoverished. Okay, let's tie these things in together. Why do you think that's happening, or is going to happen?
Well, look, I hate to say something about American uniqueness and American exceptionalism, because that concept has been besmirched by all kinds of politicians. But the fact of the matter is, historically, America was exceptional and unique. It's the only country in the world's history that was founded upon principles like individual liberty, personal freedom, free markets, free minds, free speech. These things are all being washed away very, very rapidly as we speak. So that's why I say that America is dead.
You've talked about
it was
the
a great
pillars.
idea.
You've
it was
talked
a great
about
idea
the,
while we had a good run while it lasted.
Mm-hmm. You've talked about the pillars of our republic and what makes us unique, and you're saying these pillars are all gone now? Is there any semblance of what America used to be that's left?
Well, look, we still have customs and traditions that have lingered. I mean, in the case of, for instance, China, even 20 years of Mao couldn't wash away all of their customs and traditions. So it'll be the same in the U.S. We'll maintain some of these things, some of these myths that we live on. But especially with the new administration, the Biden-Harris administration, these people, especially the people in the cabinet and all the people they're appointing below them, they're all wokesters. They're all SJWs. They're actually Bolsheviks. And one thing about Bolsheviks is that once they get control of the machinery of power, they don't let go. And we're going to find that that's the case. They're going to move to make Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. States of the Union, because there'll be 4 more senators that'll vote reliably Democratic. They'll pack the Supreme Court if the Supreme Court gives them too much trouble. They're changing the methods of voting in the country, making it much easier. Now, the country's changing before our very eyes, and change is a natural thing in the world. So nothing wrong with change. It's just that personally, I preferred what the U.S. used to stand for, not what it's now. Now it's becoming just like any one of another 200 countries that cover the face of the globe like a skin disease.
Well, what should they do, Doug, to turn this around? Based on what you've said, we're culturally shifting away from American values. Is what I'm gathering from what you're saying. And if we could tie that back into our current economic situation, for example, if you don't agree with what Yellen's saying, what should they be doing instead? If not taxes, how would they pay for the stimulus? What's going to happen to our country?
Right. Well, look, this whole COVID hysteria is about 90% nonsense. There shouldn't be any stimulus. If they want the country to do well, they should radically repeal regulations, disband 3- and 4-letter agencies, initially cut the taxes by 50%, withdraw troops, from 100 different countries around the world where they're stationed. Stop trying to make war with China, because they'll eventually succeed. There are a lot of things that they can do, but that'd bring down the current financial structure. Now, that would be unpleasant. It's going to come down anyway, trust me on that. But it's like when you have a building with a rotten foundation. It's better to bring it down with a controlled demolition than wait for it to fall at random, unexpectedly, which is the direction that we're heading now. So that's what they should do. It's not going to happen. And what would I do to change things? I'd say it's basically impossible at this point. We have a tidal wave rushing at what remains of America. And it's been set up over the last 40 years by everybody going to college and being inculcated with neo-Marxist values. And it's filtered down to the high schools, the grade schools. It's all over television. It's in the corporations. Everybody believes in this stuff. So most Americans are all for it. So the situation actually is hopeless.
Let me ask you this, Doug. America has enjoyed technological and economic hegemony over the last 70 years. Can this continue for another 70 years?
I very much doubt that because America no longer believes in itself. The average American believes that the founding principles of the country are wrong and ugly and evil. There's a movement to change the founding date of America from 1776 or 1789 to sometime back in the 17th century when slaves were first imported to the US. This is so wrong on so many levels. No, you can't fight the grand tides of history. And I'm afraid that saying the things that I am right now really are fighting the grand tides of history.
Right. Now, another statement that Yellen, I have to bring this up, I have to get your thoughts on that. She was talking about the economic recovery. Somebody asked Yellen whether or not the stimulus plan has worked, and she said that she expects full employment by next year. Could this happen? Are we on track to reach full employment by next year?
Apart from the fact that you can't trust the US government's statistics, well, you can trust them more than you can trust the statistics of the Argentine government, that's for sure. But look, most people don't even realize that when we look at talking about their statistics, Social Security disability, in 1960, when it was still a fairly new thing, half of 1% of the working population between 18 and 65 years of age were on Social Security disability. Now, it's not 0.5%, but 5% of the working population that are on it. And it's like that throughout the society. You can't trust the unemployment numbers or anything else. But to answer your question directly, is it possible we'll go to full employment? Yes, it is possible, because we might have a crack-up boom, which is what von Mises called it. If you deposit $10,000 in everybody's bank account Sunday night, Monday morning, there's going to be an immense amount of economic activity. People are going to be buying new cars and new houses and swimming pools and widescreen TVs and God knows what. It'll create immense economic activity if they did that. And that's basically what they're doing. So companies will go out and hire new workers, and it's basically going to wind up. Yes, we could have a boom, a crack-up boom of more employment, but it's going to result in an even worse depression, which I define as a period when most people's standard of living drops significantly, as well as a time when, go ahead.
Yeah, why would a crack-up boom, why would economic activity lead to an even greater depression? Can you explain that?
Because they're destroying the currency as we speak. Most Americans, if they save in dollars. And if the value of the dollar disappears, well, for one thing, the value of bonds disappear. And bonds are mainly what are in pension funds and the main backing in banks. Savings would disappear. People save in dollars. You know, they in the US, they don't generally save in gold and silver coins. So the dollar itself is being destroyed by creating more of them. If you double the supply of money, prices will approximately double in a relatively short period of time. So that's the answer to the question.
Yeah, and you've written about. Sure. Yeah.
But it takes time. You know, it's not immediate and direct. It's delayed and somewhat indirect. So the average person doesn't see this. And if prices go up, he blames the farmer or the automaker. He doesn't blame the government. He doesn't blame the Federal Reserve. So it's all very perverse.
Well, what can we do to protect ourselves from this inevitable collapse of the dollar, as you mentioned? Now, you've written about one of the solutions in your work on the International Man. I'm just going to read this paragraph here. By far, the most important reason to diversify remains getting a second passport, or at least legal permanent residency. You said that political risks are indeed growing very, very rapidly. The COVID hysteria is international and has greatly amplified political risk everywhere. So if I understand you correctly, you're advocating for people to diversify both financially and physically, geographically, move abroad. But not everybody in America has the means to do that.
Yeah, it's unfortunate because your main risk today is political. It's political risk. Your financial risks today, your economic risks are huge. But greater than them is your political risk. Look, people, even the people that have passports, don't understand that that's the property of the US government, and it can be taken away from you for lots of reasons, including being accused, not adjudicated, but accused of owing over $50,000 to the government. So
Has
if
this
you're
happened
wise and want to
before?
maintain your, pardon me,
Has this happened before?
I know somebody personally that it's happened to recently, and he's not a big shot with a lot of money. He's kind of like an average guy that got behind on his taxes, and he got a notice to that effect. So yes, this is the law, and it's
Wow.
being implemented. So this is a very good reason to have the government ID from another country. Your government treats you as a resource, as a subject, and that's a sign of it. So yes, and I understand that the average guy who, according to the Federal Reserve's own statistics, can't lay his hands on $500 if he needs it for an emergency, I understand that the average guy can't diversify internationally. I'm just saying that if you can, you should.
I was speaking to a friend of mine from Lebanon, a Lebanese fellow, and he was talking about the crisis in Lebanon now. As you're probably aware, there's hyperinflation going on. The Lebanese pound has greatly devalued, lost 80-90% of its value over the last couple of years. I asked him, what do people do? Like, how do they survive? And get this, he told me about the banking crisis going on in his country. People cannot withdraw money out of their checking account. First, they were limited to a couple $1,000s USD a month, then it dropped to a couple hundred. Then it dropped to, like, I think, I can't remember the exact amount, but less than $100 a day. The banks are physically restricting you from withdrawing your own money from your bank. And I asked him how is his family doing. He said, well, my family's fine. My family physically put cash in their apartment. They have a stockpile of cash next to their bed, so they're okay. That sounds like an impossible situation, yet it's happened to a rather developed country in the world. Could that ever happen in the US?
Yeah, sure, it could happen here. And something like that, I expect, is going to happen here with the people that are in control of the apparatus of the state. I think it's likely to happen here, quite frankly. That's why I suggest that everybody should have a stock of gold coins and silver coins. I mean, I've been buying these things for decades. I've never sold one. And to take advantage of the situation, I suggest that now is one of the best times since 1971, which is when gold was delinked from the dollar by Nixon. Gold stocks are at about the cheapest level in history relative to other stocks. They're profitable, they're paying dividends. And I think that as they create more money, which they're going to do by the bushelful, the next bubble, I expect, is going to be in gold stocks. They're very cheap now. Nobody believes in gold. They think it's a pet rock. They don't believe in gold stocks for all the reasons that Benjamin Graham outlined in his excellent book, The Intelligent Investor. They're speculative, but we're moving into a very speculative environment where prices are going to be going up and down like an elevator with a lunatic at the controls. So it's actually a good analogy. I like that. So I'm very long gold stocks and stocks for other resources too, not least of them uranium, other metals.
Okay. Finally, Doug, I want to talk about your new book coming out, Terrorist. Is this a sequel to your series starting with Speculator, or is this completely different?
No, the next one, these books get more radical as time goes on. So first
Your last
was
one was called
Speculator.
Assassin, and now it's Terrorist. So has your hero
Exactly.
Charles Knight changed from being an assassin to a terrorist?
He's just accused of being
Okay.
a terrorist. Although this book is an excellent platform for me to talk about terrorism as a method of warfare, I don't approve it, don't advocate it. It's got too many problems. But it is a method of warfare, quite frankly, like cavalry charges or artillery barrages. And Charles, having been an assassin in my last novel, and I do urge people to buy it because it's a hell of a good read with lots of good stuff in it. And talking about resources, they should buy Speculator, which is related to the mining stock business. but terrorist is going to be something he's accused of. Well, of course, since the events of March 6th in the Capitol, you're going to find lots of Americans being accused of being domestic terrorists. So its timing is quite appropriate. It's not out yet. It'll be out maybe by the end of the year.
Okay, well, we have a few minutes left. Tell us a bit more. So he's accused of being a terrorist. What has he done, Doug?
Well, you know that old saying, David, I'm a freedom fighter, you're a rebel, he's a terrorist. And Charles is accused of domestic terrorism, which in the next book after that is why he has to leave the country. Once you're accused of terrorism, you better get out of Dodge.
Is he right to be accused of terrorism?
Well, like I said, I'm a freedom fighter, you're a rebel, he's a terrorist.
Mm-hmm.
So these terms are kind of floating abstractions, okay? That are used for political purposes. And that's why in the next novel, he goes back to Africa, where it starts off in Speculator, and becomes a warlord, where I reform the unjustly besmirched occupation of warlord. Everybody thinks warlords are terrible, and they usually are, but it's not a necessary description of that job.
So you're just escalating his life, book after book. This guy has an exciting life.
Oh, and there's going to be two books. There's going to be two books after Warlord, which are going to be quite outrageous, I think. So I would advise our watchers and listeners to not fall too far behind the power curve and start off with one of these books. They're all on Amazon.
Yeah, well, they sound like fantastic reads, your future books. Doug, I look forward to following up with you when Terrorist is out, and we'll talk about your next installment in the series, rather. Pleasure to have you on as always, Doug.
Thanks, David. I feel the same.
And thank you for watching Kitco News. I'm David Lynn. Stay tuned for more.